everybody, and welcome back to the Dev Marketer channel. So good to have you guys here. We are working on part number 1 of our application and of learning how to add WebSockets to our Laravel apps. This is a very, very fun series I'm so excited to be doing, and I'm excited to get started here. So in this video, we are going to basically clone this repository. I've created a sample application for you guys so that you can follow along and basically put this to use. Doing exactly what I'm doing in the videos. So this is going to help you guys a lot. So I've created that sample app. We're going to basically clone it and get it set up. And then I'm going to show you how to configure and set up Laravel Echo. So, or broadcasting WebSockets in general. So we're going to go through those steps in this video. This is focused on configuration and setup. Next video, we will work on, in part 2, we will work on creating an API for the comments because we're going to be creating a live real-time commenting engine. And then the third video, we're actually going to put it all together, and actually that's when we're going to enable the WebSockets, and everything's going to work by part 3, okay? So that's kind of the overview of what's going on in this video. So the first 5 or 6 minutes of this video, we're going to basically clone this and get it set up as a basic Laravel project, doing the sample application that I've created for you guys. And then after that, we're going to, from then to the end of the video, is going to be focused on what you need to do in order to set up your application if you're working with like an existing application, and also to work with this one in order to add WebSockets to that application. There's a few packages you need to install, a few gotchas I want to make sure you guys don't get stuck on, and then some stuff for your app.js file and things like that. So we'll go over that in a few minutes here. Okay, now before we do anything, I want to explain what's going to happen. What are we going to be building? What's the goal of this project? Well, of course, we're going to be learning WebSockets, but the project we're actually going to be building is a real-time live commenting engine. So if you guys have ever seen the Apple keynotes or the Google keynotes, you go to these websites like CNET and The Verge will have these websites you can go to, and they'll post updates live as things happen, right? And then as soon as a new comment comes in, you don't refresh your page or anything. It pops in instantly with the new comment at the top of the feed, and all the other comments get pushed down. That's what we're going to be creating in this video. And by the third part, by part 3, we will have a working version of that, okay? So that's the end goal here, is a live commenting feed, a live commenting engine where you see those feeds pop in immediately. And if you submit a comment, it gets pushed to everyone else who's viewing that same post, and it updates it on their page without them refreshing their page. And then if you're viewing a blog post and someone else leaves a comment on that post, it's going to pop in at the top of the comment feed, push all the others down, and you're not going to have to do anything to make that happen. It's just going to change on the page as soon as they submit that new comment, okay? So that's what we're going to be creating in this video and throughout the rest of this series, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want you guys to do is, if you're following along with my tutorial, you're going to want to go down to the description, click the GitHub link, and head on over to this page. So it's github.com/devmarketer/Laravel Echo tutorial. Once you're set in here, this is going to be the repository for the entire project. In fact, right here is the full project, including all the finished files at the end of the entire series. We're going to go ahead and clone this and then start. We're going to move to, if we go to the releases here, we're going to move to this start tag. I've made a tag at the very beginning of the project where we've already created the basic structure, the authentication, the blog system, the blog post. So we don't ever have to touch any of that. I've created all of that for you. And now all we're going to do is basically configure it for WebSockets, add comments, and then we're going to put it all together and actually make the comments live. Okay, that's what we're going to be adding. So in order to start at this same place, so that you have all the same code that sets up the blog posts and the authentication stuff, you're going to want to start here at this start tag, okay? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to clone this repository, we're going to move to the start tag, and then we'll have a basic Laravel application, and then from there, we'll start adding WebSockets to it, because this is just like a standard application. If you move to the start tag is just a standard Laravel application with some basic controllers for blog posts and stuff, but it doesn't have anything to do with WebSockets, and we're going to enable that. And that way, if you guys are following along with your own projects and you already have a Laravel project and you want to add WebSockets to it, then you'll be able to kind of pick up at the same point that we do here and follow along, all right? So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so let's move back to the main page here. And let's go ahead and clone this repository. So it's going to take 4 or 5 minutes to do all this. If you want to skip over this, you can skip ahead a couple minutes. I'll try to put a link here, so the timestamp. So head over to there, and then from that point to the end of the video is going to be the portion that you need to add to every application. So if you have an existing application that you're working with, you want to do everything from that point to the end of the video in order to configure that application with WebSockets. Okay, let's go ahead and start by cloning this application. So what I'm going to do here is we are going to start by, we're inside of our project here, click this green button that says clone or download, and we're going to grab this URL. So let's copy it. That's going to copy this URL to our clipboard, and we're going to use this to clone. Okay, so let's come over here. We're going to now clone this project inside of our sites folder. That's where I like to put everything. So if we look here, these are all, each of these are a different project. So each of these are their own folder. So I want to create another folder called Echo, and I want to put this project, this whole project here, inside of that folder. That's what we're trying to do. Okay, so let's do that. Git Clone, then we're going to paste in that URL I copied from the green button, and then I'm going to do space, and then the name of the folder I want to put all this stuff in, which is called Echo. So let's go ahead and do that. Click enter. It's going to go ahead and clone it and put it inside of our project. If I do an ls command, I now have a new folder called Echo. Let's now cd into Echo, because everything I do from here on out is going to be inside of this folder. Once we're inside of here, the next step is going to be moving to that start tag. By default, we cloned the entire repository, including the final part of the project, all the way through the end of the projects. So you don't want to be there. That's the end of the project. You want to be at the start of the project. So if you look at the releases here, we want to move to this start tag. So that's what we're going to do. So in order to do that, you do a concept called checkout. So do git checkout tags/start, and we're going to check out that tag. And then we also want to do -b to create a new branch, and we're going to call this tutorial. You can call it something else if you wanted, but tutorial's good. Let's go ahead and click enter. That's going to actually create a new branch called tutorial and then move that branch to that start tag. So now you just have the beginning of the project. You don't have anything after that. And so now you can follow along with me. Now you're currently going to be on this tutorial branch, but if at any point you get lost, you can switch over to the master branch, and that will have the final finished code, okay? And you can keep switching back and forth. That's why Git is so cool. All right, so there we go. So that's everything we need for that. We're inside of Echo on our branch called tutorial. All right, so now that we got that done, let's go and actually start setting up the project. So we're going to have our composer file, but we don't have anything installed. So let's go ahead and do composer install and get all of the packages set up for basic, like I said, a basic Laravel application. That's going to run. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to run npm, right? You want to bring in all those JavaScript packages that are necessary. We're going to add a few once we get to WebSockets, but we'll just get the basic ones running right now. So run either npm install, or I like to run yarn, whichever you prefer. Just make sure you stick with one or the other. So if you start with npm, you're going to want to keep doing that throughout. If you stick with yarn, start with yarn, you want to stick with that throughout the rest. They don't seem to play very well when you switch back and forth. Okay, so I'm going to be using yarn. So there we go. So now we got yarn. That's all set up. Now we have all of our JavaScript packages. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to, let's see. The next thing we're going to do is copy our env file. So let's copy the env.example file, and we're going to create an env file out of it. Okay, so now we should have a nice clean env file. And then after that, what we're going to want to do is just run our key. So PHP artisan key generate, and that's going to generate a new authentication key and put it inside of our env file. And then after that, what we're going to want to do is set up our database. So let's head over to SQL Pro here, and I'm going to create a new database. We're going to call this database Echo, and I'm just going to set that up. There we go. Now I've got an empty database called Echo. That's perfect. And now that we have that, we can go ahead and put that information into our env file. Let's go ahead and just do that and just clear this out so you can read. So we're going to open up our env file in Nano, and I'm just going to come down here to our database, and we're going to change the database name to Echo because that's what I just created. Make sure your username is good and your password is good. For me, this is correct, so I don't need to change anything. So everything here looks good. Just make sure to change everything in your database. Go ahead and save the file. And now you should be set up. So now you can just run a normal migration. Migrate all of those tables. And then the last thing is let's run your seed. PHP artisan db:/seed, and that's going to seed the database, fill it with some dummy data. I've already set all that up for you, so you should be okay. Okay, now that we have that, I'm just going to move back to SQL Pro, And I want to just show you what we've created. If we go to Echo, here you can see we have 4 tables, migrations obviously, password resets, your standard thing there. Then we have our blog posts. You can see we created a bunch of blog posts, 100 to be precise. We've got a title that's randomly generated, a content that's randomly generated. They have a random Boolean value, whether they're published or not here. And then at the beginning, we have a user ID to associate each blog post with a user that wrote the blog post is the idea. So that's all been created. And then under users, we've got 25 users. They all have a random name, an email address, a password, which is the same for all of them. It's secret, S-E-C-R-E-T. That's been created for them. So just make sure to add that. And then if you want to log in as this user, you would just grab their email address and then use the secret as the password, and it should log you in. I also want to mention here, I've created an API token for all of them, and we're going to be using these API tokens in the next few videos because we're going to be using basically Ajax for all of this stuff. So we're going to be using API tokens to authenticate when we send a new comment and stuff like that. So I created an API token as well and generated an API token for everybody as well. Okay, so that's everything. We should be good to go there. Now you've gone ahead and finished your Laravel setup. That's the standard stuff that you need for every Laravel application to get up and running. So now let's say that this is the point where basically everything we do from here to the end of the video is going to be the stuff you need to add to every Laravel project that you want to enable WebSockets on. Okay, so this from here to the end of the video is the stuff you always need to add to any Laravel application to make it work for that. So let's do that. So first thing I want to do, before we get too carried away, let's go over and create a Pusher account. We're going to be using Pusher, which is a socket server service, okay? There's a lot of different socket server services you can use. Google has their own. AWS has a socket server service. There's PubNub, there's Pusher, there's a ton of them. If you guys want to look them up, just search socket server service or something and you'll find a million of them. We're going to be using Pusher just so that we don't have to set up the socket server itself. Now in a future video, I might show you guys how to set up that socket server, but what I don't want to do is I don't want you guys to get to the point where like you have a configuration problem with your socket server, so then you're not able to follow along and learn how to implement Laravel Echo. If we use Pusher, we don't need to worry about the socket server. It just works. And then we can just make sure our application is doing what we want. So they handle all that kind of dirty work for us. So it's got a free tier. Go ahead and just set it up for this tutorial. If you don't want to use it going forward, that's cool. But for this tutorial, it doesn't cost you anything. You can log in with your GitHub account. It's super easy. So I'm going to come over here and sign up with GitHub. It's going to log me in and you'll see that I'm here at the dashboard. You might need to fill in a few pieces of information if it's your first time logging in. Once you're here, we need to create an app. So you can have multiple applications inside of one account, right? So this is my overall account. What we want to move over is to our app, and then we want to find, you can have multiple apps here. I already have one called devmarketer-echo, but you might want to create a new application if you don't have one already. Once you create the application, you can see I've got it here. We're going to come over to our app keys, and these are the keys that we're going to need in the next few steps of this tutorial. As a side note, before we move on, with Pusher, these names that you give it need to be globally unique. So I already have one called devmarketer-echo, which means you can't call it that as well. It won't work. You need to have your own name for it. So what I recommend is just put your name or your brand name or whatever you want to call it, your brand name here, -echo, and that'll probably be good for you. But you can't call it devmarketer-echo because I already have that one taken, okay? Just keep that in mind that it has to be globally unique. All right, so there we go. You can see here's our information. You can create a new key and secret if you need to, but this is the information that I'm gonna be using. Make sure to just keep this page open because we're gonna be referencing it in a bunch here in the next few steps, okay? So now let's move back over to our terminal. Let's install a few things to get started. This is in addition to the normal stuff for Laravel. That's why I saved it for this step. It's because this is the stuff you're going to need to install whenever you're implementing Laravel WebSockets, okay? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to compose a require, and we're going to require the Pusher PHP server library. So pusher/pusher-php-server. And this is going to enable the Pusher server for our library. We do some client or some server-side broadcasting. That's how we push the event. When the event occurs server-side, we push that event information over to the Pusher servers, And that's what this library allows us to do, is to allow us to push the event information server side over to the pusher servers, okay? So we went ahead and installed that. Next thing, we're going to need to install a few NPM dependencies. We can start off with the pusher-js library. Again, that's the JavaScript version of the pusher library. So you can do npm install --save pusher-js, and that will install that. Or if you're using yarn, just do yarn add. And that's going to go ahead and install pusher.js library. And again, those obviously are both only needed if you're using pusher. If you're using something else, you would need to use those libraries for socket.io or for whatever, okay? Okay, now that we've got that done, the final thing to install is either use npm or yarn, but yarn add, we want to use Laravel Echo. This is the actual Laravel Echo library, which is brought in through JavaScript. It's a client-side library, not a server-side library. That confuses a lot of people. A lot of people seem to think it's a server-side library, but Laravel Echo is actually a client-side JavaScript library, okay? Now that we got that done, we have everything installed that we need to do. We can actually go ahead and take a look at this in the text editor and start working with it. So here we go. Something happened. Let's try that again. There we go. That was weird. Okay, so now we've got our project, and you can see we've installed our vendor folder and our node modules. Now let's go ahead and configure the Laravel side to enable that. We'll do the server side first, and then we'll do the client side stuff second. Okay, so now the first thing we need to do is go to config/app.php. At the bottom of this app.php file is your application service providers. Come down here to the bottom. Here's your application service providers. You can see there's a service provider for your app, for your authentication, for your events, and for your routes. The one thing that's commented out is your broadcasting service provider. Because not every application uses broadcasting, it's commented out by default. So you just want to enable that by getting rid of the comment. And now save the file, and now you should have broadcasting enabled in your application. Pretty easy, right? Okay, next let's go ahead and configure the authentication information for our pusher library that we have. So come to config broadcasting. This is where you configure all of the connections for your various socket servers, okay? So if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll look, this is very similar to like the database connections. You establish, we've got this array of connections, and then each of these is a different connection that we can reference by this name. So we can call it Redis, we can call it pusher, you could call it standard, you could call it remote, you could call it whatever you want to do. And then inside of that connection, you have all the information to connect to whatever you're trying to connect to. Okay, so we're going to grab one of these connections and we're going to fill it in, and we'll connect using this pusher name is what we're going to do. All right, so we're going to use the pusher driver, that's good. The key is going to be the pusher app key, it grabs it out of our env file, that'll be good. Then we have the app secret from our env file, that'll be perfect. The app ID from our env file, and then we have some other options. Now we do want to define a few other options, so let's go ahead and do that now. The first one we're going to want to define is called cluster. The cluster is going to be the location for your that your app lives on. So let's go ahead and set that up in the env file as well. We'll just call it pusher app cluster. And then we can go ahead and set that up in the env file to make it easy. The last thing I want to do here is encrypted. This is going to be required for pusher. It requires you to encrypt the information. So we're just going to set that to true. So set encrypted to true. You don't need to worry about anything else, but this is required for pusher. Okay, that's everything else. There we've got our first connection. It's called pusher. You could give it a different name if you wanted, but we'll just call it pusher. That's our connection, and this is all the information that's needed to connect to that socket server. Again, you could have multiple socket servers here that each of them has their own connection, and then whichever one you want to connect to send a broadcast out to, you would just reference that connection name, and it would connect to that one. And this allows you to have multiple socket servers you could connect to if you wanted to. Most of the time you only need one, but you could have multiple. There we go. So that's it. Now we've gone ahead and defined this pusher connection. Okay, now we still need to define the environmental variables for these 4 components. So what we're going to do is we're going to head over to our env file and set that up. Now if we scroll down, you can see we have 3 of the 4 down here already. The app ID, the app key, and the app secret are already set up. The only thing we need to do is pusher app cluster, that new one we created, and set that one up now as well. Okay, now we can get all this information from our browser. We have all that information right here. Let's go ahead and copy it over. So grab our app ID and paste it in here. Then let's grab the key and paste it in here. Then let's grab the secret from here and paste it in. Oops, don't get rid of that. And then let's grab the cluster MT1 for me and paste that in here as well. There we go. That's all the information we need. We now have that connection set up in broadcasting. This is all configured because we set up those env files. Okay, now let's move up to the top here. You can see we do want to define a default connection. What to use if we don't specifically specify a connection, what should Laravel just assume to use by default? And that's what you define here as your default one. We only have one, so let's just set up the one that we have as our default one. In this case, we want pusher, that's connection we just created, pusher, to be the default broadcast driver. So you could define it here, or again, you could put it in the env file. So let's come over to the env file, and the broadcast driver is actually up here. You can see it's set to log right now. Let's just change that to pusher, or whatever the name of the connection is that you created. There we go. That's everything. Now, before we move on, I want to mention that there is a queue driver here. Whenever you're working with broadcasts, all broadcasts by default are queued. So you are going to need some sort of queue in order to work with broadcasts. Now, for development, you can just keep the queue driver set to sync because this allows you to work in development without actually creating a queue. But for production, you're not going to want to use that. You're going to want to use Amazon's queue service. You can use Beanstalk, which is what I've used a lot, or Redis. Those both work really well. So you're going to want to use some sort of queue system here in order to set these up, because every time we want to broadcast to our socket server, that API connection can take half a second, 3/4 of a second, who knows? And so that connection should be queued so that it doesn't hang up your server. And so that's what's happening here. So we want to make sure to queue that, and then by default, everything is going to get queued. So just make sure you have a queue set up, and you're going to want to define the queue driver here. So this is okay for our demonstration purposes. This should be good. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and close that. And that's it for all of our server-side setup. Now everything else is going to be the client-side setup that we need. All right, so we're going to be working with actual Laravel Echo, the client-side library, to set some stuff up in our app.js file. Now, before we move over to the app.js file, there's one thing that catches up a lot of people. The two biggest things that catch a lot of people is, first of all, what I'm going to show you right here is inside of your main template file in app.blade.php. This is every single page inherits this app.blade.php. You want to make sure you have this meta CSRF token field. Okay, Laravel Echo is going to look for this every time it sends a request or receives a request. It needs this CSRF field, and if you don't have it, you're going to just it's just going to silently die. Now, this throws a lot of people off because a lot of people don't realize that you need to have this meta token here, and so if you don't have it, then it just doesn't work. The other thing that throws people off is the queue that I just mentioned. It'll seem like everything works and there won't be any errors, but it won't actually be broadcasting. Nothing's working, and you won't understand why. And you'll go over to pusher and you don't see anything. Pusher isn't receiving anything, and so you're like, what's going on? You keep sending it. Well, it's because everything is going into the queue and you're not actually running the queue. And so that's what throws a lot of people off, is everything gets put in the queue, they forget to run the queue, or they don't have the queue set up, and so everything's just sitting in the queue waiting to send to pusher, and there's no errors because nothing went wrong, right? Other than obviously the queue's not running. So that throws off a lot of people too. So those are the two big gotchas, is not having the queue set up and not realizing that by default, every broadcast is queued. And then the other thing that throws people off is not having this meta token. So make sure to copy it exactly like this, or if you're using the authentication scaffolding for Laravel, it'll automatically put this into your app.blade.php file if you do the authentication scaffolding, okay? So that's already in here for us. We don't need to do anything. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, now let's talk about setting up our app.js file. So we're gonna go to our resources /app assets /js and then our app.js. So make sure you're doing the app.js that's inside of the resources folder, not the one inside of the public folder. Okay, so inside of the JavaScript, we're gonna grab this app.js, and we're going to set this file up now. Okay, so you can see we require the bootstrap file, and then we set up Vue. We are going to be using Vue to update the DOM, so we're going to want to keep this. However, we don't need to have a global Vue instance because this can cause problems. So let's, well, it doesn't cause problems, but because we're going to be enabling Vue on a page-by-page basis, we don't want a global one because, see, they're both going to be connected to the same element, and that'll cause problems. Okay, so let's go ahead and just comment this out, save this file, and now we want to enable Laravel Echo, and that's going to be on this bootstrap file. So let's go and open that up over here. So bootstrap.js. If you scroll to the bottom, down here at the bottom, you can see we have a bunch of stuff for Laravel Echo, and it's commented out. So these bottom comments that you have the slash comments, we want to comment back out so that they're enabled. And we want to just basically enable those, and this is going to set up Laravel Echo in our application. Now Laravel Echo, you can see here we import it, Laravel Echo, from the package Laravel Echo. This now is going to be available after we compile our app.js. It'll be available on every single page, and we can use it. We also have access to Pusher. That comes from our Pusher library. And then down here, we actually configure some defaults for Echo, and we create a new Echo instance, again, that'll be available on every page. So let's go ahead and make sure you change your broadcaster to whichever one you're using. We're using Pusher, so we can leave it alone. Next, we've got our key. We're going to want to go ahead and put our key inside of here. So we can grab that one more time. Let's grab this key up here. This is the key that you want. Make sure not to put your secret on your JavaScript. This secret code never wants to be on the front end of your website because this secret enables all sorts of full access to your Pusher account. You only want this publicly safe key on your front end. That's the only thing you want on the front end. Don't put these other things on here. Well, cluster's okay. We're going to put that here too. Okay, so let's go ahead and paste that in. Make sure you get that key, not the secret. And then the last thing we'll want to add here under after the key is just go ahead and set up the cluster MT1. But again, if you want to reference that, just come back over here and you can check it. And then the final one is encrypted. Once again, encrypted. And we want to set encrypted to true. Okay, and then that's everything. So now you've got everything set up in your app.js file. Just make sure that you've also commented out this because we're going to want to use Vue on each individual page. Okay, let's go ahead and close those files. That sets up your JavaScript file. You now have everything you need. The last step is just to compile your JavaScript. So over in terminal, we're just going to run npm run dev. That's going to go through, grab that app.js file, compile it for development, and then put it into the public folder. Now that it's in the public folder, there you go, it ran successfully. Now that it's in the public folder, we've got it right here, app.js. Now all of our pages will have access to what we just changed, which is we added Laravel Echo into our app.js file. So now it's available to everything on our application. So that's it. That's all it takes to get set up. Just as a quick recap, once you do the basic Laravel setup, all you need to do is you want to configure, go to your config/app file, and you're going to want to make sure to enable the broadcast service provider right here. Make sure to get rid of the comments so that it's enabled. After that, you're going to want to set up your connections. Okay, so we created a connection here. We put in all the information needed for it. That's the next step, is connections. You're going to want to make sure to enable that with your default driver. And then after that, all you really need to do is set up your app.js file. Make sure to re-enable the you want to re-enable this commented out portion, and then also just fill it in with any appropriate information so that it can connect to Pusher. Okay, so that's everything that it takes to really get a project up and running with WebSockets. We now have the groundwork laid. So now the next video, part 2, what we're going to do is we're going to start working on our real-time comments. And the first step of doing that is just building a commenting engine, just a standard way that you would save comments to the database. That's what we're going to focus on in the next video. We're going to create an API so that we can submit comments via the API. So that way when our users submit the comment, they don't need to refresh the page. It can happen with asynchronously without refreshing the page. And then also any other users in the third video will set it up so that it gets broadcast, that new comment gets broadcast to every other user that is viewing that page at that exact moment. And that's going to create that experience of a real-time live commenting engine. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and learned a lot. I know it gets long, but I want to make sure you guys understand all this stuff. So hopefully you guys learned a lot. If you do get lost or confused, I recommend checking out the written tutorial, which is available down in the description, and it's available over on devmarketer.io. So be sure to go check that out. And then, of course, if you have any questions, leave comments here on YouTube. I love them. Leave a thumbs up if you appreciated it. And then, last but not least, if you haven't subscribed, be sure to subscribe. But I bet you guys are already subscribed, so no worries there. That's everything I got for you guys in this video, part 1. I will see you guys in part 2, the next video. See you there.